Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning. This is Llorraine Neithardt, and your host for Venus Unplugged. And what we do here at Venus Unplugged is we discuss all things Venusian. Love, relationships, archetypal energies, psychic realities, whatever, which is all about Eros. It's all about relatedness, whether we know we're relating or not. So that's what we do here. And you can look at and listen to other episodes if you go on Blog Talk Radio or on my website, LorraineNeithardt.com, and listen to the last year or so, actually. Pretty amazing. So what today? What do I bring you today? I usually have, a really strong sense of what I want to discuss and what I want to look through, and that wound up not being true today. And I realized, what am I resisting? It's always an interesting thing. This is the Lenten time for people that do Lent. It's a very important time where they sacrifice something, they give something up. What I give up, or what I'm giving up this year, we can give up chocolate because we really secretly want to lose 5 pounds, or we can give up something because secretly we're going to get. And I thought, that's really not sacrificing, making sacred too. You really got to give something that makes you think, and you can find yourself tripping over it, and then you have to reevaluate. So I came up with giving up resistance, particularly because I think I don't have much resistance. I'm kind of open with my planets in Gemini and curious. But the second you claim something like, okay, I'm going to give up resistance, do you realize, or at least I'm realizing, wow, I have resistance. So that's what I woke up to this morning, was this resistance. What am I resisting here? I want to give forth, and I love doing this Venus Unplugged, and I am Venus possessed, and all things that have to do with Venus. And then I realized, I am not being balanced in the sense that, it's very easy for me to obviously come from the side of the feminine, or the male within the female, the animus, and I don't really give due diligence to the AnIMA. I talk about it. I drop it here and there, but I haven't really gone into it. It's been pretty much from the feminine point of view, which, of course, I know. So I feel I have a sense of authority. So I realized my resistance was, maybe I'm resistant to talking about the AnIMA. I mean, I've got a good, solid understanding and lots of experience, but it doesn't quite come from that core knowing, something I had to learn about, something I had to study. And I think that happens with a lot of women, that we really do believe that we know a lot about men. But how could we? We're not them. We really... we think we do, but do we? Do we really know about the inner workings and what is this AnIMA? When we develop concepts over centuries, and we talk about men, both in a positive and negative way, and we have it on the highest authority, what men are and aren't, a lot of it's collective flapdoodle, just stuff we've heard. I can remember as a child, my mother always saying, well, all men are children. And I would think, well, how come they get to stay children? Who's keeping them children? They're not children. Sometimes, because they don't grow, they can keep I'm choking on this. Obviously, this is my resistance. So I know I'm on the track. When you give something up and then you've got to suffer it consciously, like right now my resistance, so my throat is closing up as I'm talking about the AnIMA. Okay. But when you give something up, it comes up exactly the way it's coming up here from the unconscious. It says, no, don't talk about that. And it's like, no, I need to talk about it because it's in the area code of resistance. And so I am sacrificing that to see what's behind that. And that's the way it works when we want to become conscious. We need to become conscious of what we don't know, not what we do know. We can know where we're a little shit or where we're petty or where we're, not the cleanest souls on the planet. But it's where the resistance is. That's where the gold is. So there's two sources, which I think are magnificent, to begin the journey into, what is the masculinity? Let's just approach that. There is a tendency for women to question more and want to go deeper into psyche's world, the soul ecology. But men are really, really working very hard to become conscious. And we've got to give them and try to meet halfway, because they are absolutely, sometimes it's marvelous and sometimes it's totally daunting that they're so completely other. It's like, wow, I would have never thought of that. So when we can give a fair questioning, what is that to be male? What is that about? And it starts, of course, with what Jung has labeled the AnIMA. And the AnIMA is the inner feminine in a man. Now, what's interesting about the AnIMA is we don't know, most men, like women, don't know that they're being influenced by the animus. And men don't necessarily know they're influenced by their AnIMA. It's just, it's something that they do, something that they think, something that they feel. So in order to understand some of the deeper aspects of a man's relationship to women, we need to understand his conscious ideas of women represent one facet of his experience with actual women. The AnIMA, or the inner woman, as a conditioner of his personal relationships, is derived from both personal and archetypal images of the female. The quality and the types of man's experience and his personal mother, the mother surrogates, the sisters, not a lot is talked about sisters and brothers, as well as other women he encountered in early life, all contribute to the inner feminine in the psyche. Their inner images are also influenced by social and cultural descriptions of femininity. Now, even deeper than that, so yes, we can say, the man is with his mother, or is in love with his mother, or the mother complex, but below the personal relationships and images of the mother and the women in his life, both positive and negative images, is a deeper connection and root line to the great mother, the archetypal mother, the she who must be obeyed mother. Because in so many ways, psyche, the unconscious, is infinity. It's huge and complicated and fascinating all at the same time. So, we're dealing with, when someone doesn't know, they really don't know. And very often we'll accuse somebody of knowing, but they don't. They're doing the same thing again and again, but a complex is motivating them. Now, we're not saying like, you got a mother complex, so you can step all over me. No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is to observe and notice and understand when we're projecting, because we project what we think the image is inside. And very often two people are talking about the same exact thing. They have different ways of expressing it, but never the twain shall meet because they don't know. So to the man, the outer woman represents a large aspect of his life. It's mysterious and it's unresolved otherness. So they just shrug their shoulders and go like women. That doesn't mean that we're not being effective. It just means they don't know. And if we can be still and listen and observe, that's, of course, if our animus isn't jumping all over the place. So whether or not a man is conscious of it, the inner struggle with this masculine-feminine polarity is one of his life's greatest issues. Among other things, behind every man is a woman, whether he is successful or not. The deeper truth, however, is that the most influential women in his life is not the outer woman, but the personal and archetypal inner representation of the feminine image, his anima. The outer woman, as women, often correspond in many ways to this unconscious image, since it is upon her, and for them, this image is projected. So, in relationships, of course it gets a little confusing. Because when we fall in love, which is a fall, it means there's an anima and an animus collision. Oh my God, that's it. That's her. He has no idea that that's who it is until he sees her. And then the fall happens and the projection happens. So in order to make a connection to his inner woman, a man must first find her. And usually what gets men into some type of therapy or into questioning or working, is that he suddenly begins to realize it's not working. His belief, most men, because they've been taught that too, to honor and love the women, they provide. And they're in the doing. And as women, it's like, but they're not talking, they're not relating. But that is their talking, that is their relating. So it's being able to understand, oh, I get it. That is his code of loving. That is what he's been taught. Now, granted, there is a divine discontent in many people, and particularly in the second adulthood. We get about 40 years out of the ego, and then the soul starts kicking up and giving us conditions, or divorces, our life blows up, or we get an illness, something that, our well-honed life and all our rules and regulations and the letter of the law and how we've lived our life, and this is the way it is, suddenly just turns to mud. None of it is true. We fall into depression, or particularly for men, if they lose their job, they don't know what to do. They're so identified with that, with the providing, with the overcoming, and this is one of the most difficult and very often the cause of certainly breakups and divorces, when there's the loss of identity in the world, and they're not taught to, or hopefully by some happy synchronicity, meaningful coincidence, they read a book or come across somebody or something that says you need to go, in a sense, on your Grail legend. You need to go in search of the Grail. And the Grail is, in the Western world, it's pretty much the myth, the male myth that rules the Western world. And there's a marvelous book. There's always marvelous books. It's called He by Robert A. Johnson, and this is about understanding the masculine psychology. So for anyone who wants to sacrifice what they think they know about men and psychology and the male psychology, I certainly would suggest this book. I love Robert Johnson. I reread all of his books every year, and he writes in a very simple manner, but man, does he suck it to you when you're paying attention. So every time I reread, it's like, oh, wow, I didn't remember that. So he gives really, and he is one of the first, I think he was one of the first people to, when the school was open, not the psychological club, which was the first level of Jungians, but when the actual Jungian school opened up in Zurich, he was one of the first students. So I guess he would be considered second generation. So in what he talks about is that in this grail is the man's journey, and how that the man needs to separate from the mother and the mother complex. But if you don't know you have it, you don't know what you're separating from. And, we often labor under the delusion, females, that life is really pretty easy for men, at least when compared to their own life. And we have no idea what a complicated struggle is really involved in the transition from male childhood to real manhood. They have no idea of the long and arduous journey and road that they travel by the male child who must separate from his original, indispensable, nurturing mother and venture forth into a way of experiencing himself that is not only her way, but that he cannot learn from her either by example or instruction. So if we consider this in these terms, right, what is the myth that is behind the male? So it's easy to see that a girl must learn from her mother, like the Demeter and Persephone myth, which is about the relationship, the mythology, the basic mythology of the Western world, of the female child and the mother. But meanwhile, a boy must learn to be different from the great mother and from his own mother. And without this difference, he's just going to be fearful his whole life. So, but unfortunately, the current conditions of the Western culture all too often favor that. We think we just know, and we don't. So, in this book, it's a very interesting read, and it's about the mythology of the Holy Grail, the journey for the hero's journey, for the modern man, and for the modern man to be able to differentiate what his truth is, what he feels is, who is this woman within, who is this woman without. Now, nobody's going to enter these realms unless they've been wounded, seriously wounded. I'm seeing more and more that men between 20 and 30 are waking up earlier or just being wounded earlier. So they start their journey like now. But most men won't really start this journey until somewhere between 35 or 40, or like I said, where there's a great disappointment in the society or a great loss. Then they'll begin to say, what's happening is their psyche is forcing them through outer events. Because in the Western world, we believe the outer is the only reality. only to find out that it is the inner world, the working of the psyche, the working of the unconscious, that's really ruling. And that comes as a very rude awakening. And most people will not go near it. And I also feel that that's because they're not supposed to. It's not their destiny. It also needs to be your fate, your destiny to become whole. It's not a random experience. It's not something that we do because it's popular. We do it because we don't, in some ways, don't have a choice. Our soul is demanding that we begin to look and discover and grow. So today I want to talk about projection. What is that? A lot of times I hear people saying, oh, well, that's just a projection. And in that case, I know they really don't understand projection, because if it was just a projection, they would realize, too, that it's part of their projection. So people will use, in order not to look at their own shadow or their own material, they'll use it as a scapegoat, an excuse. We're all involved in one another. That's what relatedness is. So whatever's going on in our life, we really have to tell ourselves the story again and again from different points of view. From the shadow, from the trickster, from all different ways. So I want to just briefly go over what projection is, so that we can start to understand how powerful it is. Now, if somebody is projecting and you're clear on your part, they're telling you a wealth of information about what their inner world is about. And if we can give up thinking that we know who that person is, which is the kiss of death, because as soon as someone says, I know who you are, well, you're dead, because you're not a living being anymore. They think they know, and once they know, they no longer listen. And when we feel that, we can't relate anymore. You think you know me? Really? That's interesting. You don't even know yourself. How are you going to know me? So projection it's necessary. It's part of how psyche works. It's not conscious. We don't know that we're doing it until it's up and out. But the purpose of projection is so we can get to see what's going on in our inner world. That's what it really is for. It is the way to see, like, holy moly, I didn't know that I felt that way, or I didn't know that person felt that way until I got the projection. Now, when somebody projects onto us, and it's really not true of our being, it's like having to wear the scarlet P for projection, okay? It's so painful. And yet, when somebody is deeply involved in the projection, they can't see. They really cannot see. So we have to step away. So realizing, the AnIMA, we're talking about with men, so his inner female, right? Realizing the AnIMA is a critical factor in the development of the masculine consciousness. Not only because much of the success or failure of a man's relationship hinges on the integration of this otherness, but also because the AnIMA is responsible for a man's connection to his unconscious. If a man cannot gain access to his unconscious, he may remain stuck on the personal level and never move beyond a superficial orientation to life. Now, for those who have been listening to the show for a while, a couple of months ago, we went over the different types of feminine. So let's say if a woman is an AnIMA woman, she becomes what the man wants. She doesn't even know she's doing it. She loses her sense of self. She becomes the darling doll or the little girl or the great mother, whatever the man needs, and has no separateness. See, when a woman knows a sense of herself, she knows when the man is projecting. but then observes and listens. Because when you love somebody, it's not loving them because they match your idea. It's loving them because they are so completely and utterly different. And also fascinating. Infuriating at times, but also fascinating. I never knew that about that person after the relationship is dead. No, the person is dead. Suddenly we find out so much. Now, for a man to become aware of his anima, he must identify the anima's image in his dreams, in his fantasy, in his projections onto actual women in his outer world. Having identified these images, he must then struggle with and reclaim them as projections in order to access the potentials of the anima that represent within himself. Now, see, when a man is connected to his anima, he's got a direct link to creative forces. There's a very famous story with Jung, and he was working dreams with this adolescent that he was working with, and this guy wasn't getting anywhere, and Jung was getting a little frustrated, and finally he said, Mr. whatever his name was, how are you addressing your anima? And the man said, I'm saying, come on, you got to help me. I know that you're there. And Jung was like, oh, no. She'll chop your head off. The way that you approach the anima is that you drop the ego, your sense of self. The ego needs to be in service to the soul and to the anima. And how may I serve you? And little by little, she'll begin a creative dialogue with you and help you. Otherwise, she'll make your life miserable. So, the old saying, it's not nice to fool Mother Nature. Well, it's the same with the anima. We cannot be fooled. So, in psychoanalytical theory, projection was originally defined as a defense mechanism against thoughts, feelings, or impulses that were unacceptable to the ego, as a way of protecting the self-image of the ego. Now, Freud saw defenses as neurotic mechanisms that protected the ego from painful feelings, and it did not want to acknowledge. But from a more contemporary and Jungian perspective, however, while the projection may be at times a neurotic defense, its function is always seen as positive. Projection is one of the ways by which we may eventually become aware of the unconscious parts of ourselves that are indeed deeper understanding and integration, such as the anima. The complete absence of projection, on the other hand, could result in narcissistic preoccupation. I can't talk this morning. Preoccupation with oneself. All of a man's emotional energy would be self-contained, resulting in rather withdrawal and schizoid orientation to women and the world. One form of projection is projected identification. It occurs when the content of the projection is so identified with the other person that there is little chance of the projection being seen through withdrawal. So what happens is a person projects. That's when you feel that you have no identity. They just project onto you. They don't realize there's anything separate, and that's where all the misunderstanding comes from. No, I'm not your darling doll. No, I don't want to be a little girl. I want to be a woman in my own right, and this is who I am. Well, if a man needs you to be the darling doll or his mother, it's not going to fly. But if we start to understand, it begins with understanding. Educate, listen to, before we think we know. Resist the temptation to think we know about a man's process when we don't. So let's start with this book, He, and take a look at this and start to see where your resistance is, where you think you know something and you don't. And then comes that exciting moment when you begin to understand. And then we can let our relationships live, and they can live through these difficult times or a difficult growth period in the relationship, and then union results, because that's what it's about. We come together, and then we separate, and then we come together, and this is the journey. So a man's journey is that quest for that Holy Grail. So let's find out about that. Until next week, have a glorious week. Bye-bye.
Progressive presents Mindfulness with Flow.
Before you lies a beautiful meadow. In that meadow, Progressive Direct has placed its auto insurance rates alongside those of competitors. You select the lowest rate and feel a great sense of calm. A great sense of...
Compare Progressive Direct rates with competitors' rates so you can rest easy. Visit Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Vary based on how you buy. Vary based on how you buy. Vary based on how you buy.